Welcome everyone to Money Talks. This talk series is in sync with the invitation for money stories and also for the writing program, a 6 weeks workshop with ladies first as the story prompt. Please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz for more. It is our privilege to have poet and writer K-Ming Chang as our esteemed guest today. K-Ming Chang is the author of the novel Bestiary and a forthcoming short story collection. So, K-Ming, I have a few questions for you, which about your book Bestiary. So, your book breaks down many stereotypes of subservient Asians and instead presents these raw characters, which are totally different from typical Asian characters presented in global media. So, was that something that you intended to showcase to change the image of Asians in global among global audiences?
Yeah, that what a wonderful question. Thank you so much. Yeah, I was definitely. It wasn't something I was consciously doing. I think while I was writing or realizing that I was doing. But I think I did really want to. I don't know, reimagine this family and present this family in a way that's very um, kind of unapologetic in a lot of ways. And as a group of people who don't necessarily want to assimilate in a very certain way, who kind of, yeah, are very unabashed and kind of wild in the way that they do things and see the world, and don't necessarily want to tame those things for the story. Yeah, I didn't want to place them in a more, I don't know, recognizable or expected kind of assimilation story that I think we're used to seeing.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that from like the bit I've read about your books. And also, I have read about your upcoming book, Bone House, and I've seen that similar to Bestiary, nature and Taiwanese culture plays a very important role in your stories. So, are those things something that are a constant source of inspiration to your writing?
Yes, definitely. Bonehouse is especially fun because I got to play with and subvert a classic Wuthering Heights that I love so much, but kind of recontextualize it um, in this completely new way and bring a different lens to it. And definitely folklore and mythology, and specifically Taiwanese mythology and Taiwanese folklore, continues to be an engine in all of my work. I think I'm just endlessly fascinated by the stories that I grew up with, and a desire to continue to wrestle with them, to retell them, um, to recast them, to be in conversation with these stories. So definitely it continues to fuel me as I write.
I actually love Wuthering Heights, so I'd love to read that book once it comes out.
Oh yeah, it's very tiny. It's because it's a little chapbook. But yes, I
Oh,
similarly love the
yeah,
drama of Wuthering
yeah.
Heights.
So, my last question is, your writing is very poetic in a very fantastical manner. Are there any particular authors who inspire you in this style of writing?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of writers that I love kind of have a surreal, playful way of writing that I kind of aspire to and am inspired by. Helen Oyeyemi is one of those writers. Her new book just came out, and it's just incredible and fantastic. Marilyn Chin, Maxine Hong Kingston, um, an author named Benita Blackburn, whose work I really love, and who has this very kind of concise language, but at the same time, the imagery is something that I'm really drawn to. Yeah, those are just a handful.
Right.
So it was
Thank you
lovely
so much.
talking to you, Kami.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
so
Isha.
much.
You will come back in a short while. And Keming, if I may take the conversation forward,
Yeah,
I
of
wanted
course.
to know that you called Bestiary a speculative history. Would you tell us a little bit about what is your thought behind the term?
Yeah, I mean, I love that question. I'm not sure if I necessarily invented this term or if it already exists, but I was thinking about the way that we typically talk about speculative fiction. Oftentimes, when we think about the word speculate, it refers to the future, and speculative fiction is often kind of thinking about and reimagining and depicting a future. And I'm really interested in speculation, what it means to reimagine and to kind of guess about what is possible and write towards what is possible, but with a different orientation, facing the past rather than the future. I'm interested in bringing elements of speculative fiction and speculation and reimagination and possibility, but toward the past and what it means to reimagine the past and reimagine history and what could be possible, and kind of creating and finding your own lineages.
Wonderful. So, I found that myth, fantasy, nature, power, all four have very intrinsic roles to play in your story. How do the four connect with you as an individual and also as an author?
Yeah, I definitely think that all of these elements to me are really fused in my process, and that especially myth, it's tied to so much. It's tied to community, to oral storytelling, to history, to belief, and faith, and the relationships between the women that I was interested in exploring. So I think all the elements kind of branched out of that element, and I think writing about myth and writing about the mythical scale allowed me to create on a very kind of grand cosmic level as well, and to think very elementally about the elements of a story, and also to bring that sense of playfulness and possibility to the storytelling, which is this feeling that I always want to follow. Like I never want to be too kind of self-serious in my writing, to always follow that sense of possibility.
Right. I will, in due course of time, come into the primary critiques and criticisms that has come as a part of the conversation that we have, because I found them very, very interesting, because the criticisms are actually praises. So my next question is that the novel is replete with references of femininity and power. The reference of the woman developing the tiger tail sounds like, assuming great power to battle a trauma, and the girl must go back to her family history to revise the source of that pain. This seems in sync with the very modern feminist derivative that seeks voice, agency, respect after years of suppression. How did you build upon these kind of linkages?
Thank you so much for that question. It's really beautiful. I think, again, it wasn't something that I was always intentionally doing. I think originally with the tiger tail, it was really difficult for me to kind of navigate that, because I wanted it to be both a source of power and agency, like you were saying, something that she can wield, something that's an extension of her. And at the same time, it is something that she feels poses a danger to her, that also feels like this terrible burden, or this inherited ability to continue the cycle of violence that she has inherited from generations and generations of violence. And I definitely think that idea of like, what does it mean to have agency? What does it mean to also be a part of this kind of collective group of people, and to have inherited this trauma, and to have this kind of double-edged sword as an inheritance? All of those things were, I think, not quite resolved in this tale, and I purposefully wanted it to not be resolved, to not be a very clean kind of arc with the tale. I had an original ending of the book where at the very end she severs the tail and is kind of done with it and is clean of it, and I realized that that wasn't quite the right ending for a while, because I think the ambiguity at the end of her continuing to have this tail and always not being completely sure what it means for her and whether it can be and what it means in different contexts, I think was really important to me. That kind of messiness. I think that's something, I mean, that we also observe in the world too, of intergenerational trauma, of carrying something and knowing that at once it kind of binds you to this group of people, and at the same time, is something that could be weaponized and could be very kind of terrifying as well. So I think the tale has a very purposefully messy, purposefully kind of unresolved meaning. But that, like you said, it does branch from that idea of, is it possible to carry this wound and to heal it, or is it a weapon that kind of allows this character to continue, or reminds this character to continue inflicting violence? So I think what you said, like that, I don't know, there's a constant kind of wrestling and internal battle about it. Yeah.
True. You said something very beautiful, that power is pressurizing. It is. And that this particular word, that power is pressurizing, connects very well to the theme of this conversation, which we are doing for our money project. And money also brings power, which is very pressurizing, very humbling sometimes, sometimes very numbing, very difficult, because it's a double-edged sword. Thank you so much for that answer, K-Ming. And I request the audience to think about this, something that she said, that power is pressurizing. Maybe you could weave your story under that. That stands as a very beautiful story prompt, if I may say so. K-Ming, the book is criticized, the book Bestiary is criticized for being crass with certain metaphors or scenes. They cause discomfort. Did you deliberately bring that to add a shock value? The mother eating the daughter's earwax is another expression of impoverished hunger. Is it something like that? Or would you agree to such kind of an interpretation? How would you react?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I feel like definitely the reader has a lot of freedom to interpret how they would like. Like, I definitely don't want to kind of impose my own meaning or intention on it, because I really believe deeply that the book now belongs to the reader rather than to me. Yes. I will say, though, that I was thinking of that earwax eating scene as a kind of intimacy between the characters, to kind of depict how their bodies, they don't feel those like boundaries between their bodies. That they have this extremely intimate bond with one another. And also it's a bit, gross and playful. And yeah, I think definitely those criticisms, I think they're perfectly valid to kind of think, oh, maybe the author's doing it for shock value. I think for me writing it, I didn't know that I was doing it. So I wasn't necessarily thinking like, oh, this will definitely like shock or startle the reader. It was something so natural to me. It was the very opposite of that, where I didn't even know that I was doing it. And I was completely not conscious of like how many times I'd use a certain word, or how many times I'd mentioned these bodily fluids. And I think, again, writing about the intimacy between these characters, and thinking about the crassness of a lot of the myths as well. The tiger eating the children's toes. And I recently just read another Taiwanese myth about, or Taiwanese story about how humans are kind of descended from dog feces, that I found wonderful and delightful. That there is a crassness to these very elemental and kind of originating stories. And I think that removing ourselves from shame and associating our bodies with shame, I think oftentimes frees us and then liberates us to talk about our bodies in a way that maybe in the public is seen as not very socially acceptable. And again, with kind of portraying the relationship between the characters and the way that they talk about their bodies and speak, I think that oftentimes, like, those we are most intimate with and trust the most are those that we can speak about our bodies with. Just like thinking about my own kind of close friendships and relationships with family, like those are often the people that I am able to have those conversations with or to talk about in a kind of an offhand way. Whereas with, a stranger or someone that you're completely not intimate or close with, that kind of language is extremely taboo and attached to a lot of, I think, social norms about what is okay to speak about. So kind of wanted to create this environment for the characters where you understand that they don't necessarily feel that social pressure or shame when they're around each other.
I find this very fascinating because when you give your explanation, there are a lot of things that come to my mind. For example, when a baby is born, for the mother, the baby's stool is not something which they would run away from. For the others, it might be. So I completely understand that where this is coming from, that complete acceptance probably the parents give to the child, but not necessarily the rest of the world. And it is probably that kind of a bonding, that kind of a binding that you have referred to. And it is so interesting how differently people think, and though the situations are so similar in different in all kind of conditions. So that's probably the power of words. K-Ming migration and the resultant situation of the refugees convey its own story of scarcity and hardship. In many ways, the magical and mythical elements in your story are echoing the hunger and financial mess of the characters. I found it in this example that the aunt with a snake in her belly, or when I mean, these are quotes from your book. The aunt with a snake in her belly is a particular phrase, a part of a sentence from the book Bestiary. Or when I say shut your mouth, I mean survive. That is another statement from the book Bestiary. So, are these such kind of, are you trying to refer to that kind of financial mess or economic mess of the characters, or is it something else?
Yeah, I definitely think that idea of scarcity that you bring up definitely is what a lot of the mythological and magical elements are trying to interact with. I remember when Bestiary came out, there's a publication called Repeller that wrote a really beautiful write-up about how magical realism, at its best, can bring to life all, like, objects and people that have been in some way buried, whether that, like, buried because of history, because of political connotations, because of migration histories, or things that have been kind of ejected or rejected from our social environment, are then resurrected and given new life, and are able to kind of speak for themselves and have agency. And I really love that definition of magical realism and what it can do. And so I think a lot of what I was trying to write about are these, these lost objects, or resurrected people that are given new life and new agency, even if it's not quote unquote realistic in the story or in the family history. I think it was really important for me to kind of play with those borders a lot. And definitely the idea of scarcity figures prominently within their lives, and with the idea of inheritance, of, is it possible to inherit loss? What do you inherit when your inheritance isn't money or objects, or things like that? Like, I remember being really little and I would ask, like, my mom would say, oh, your grandma had this coat that she wanted to give you one day, but those kinds of things, it just doesn't make the cut when you're moving from one place to another. You can't keep or hold on to things. And so I'm really interested in what what are ways to redefine inheritance, and what does inheritance mean if it's not being used in this kind of traditional sense of what we typically think of as an inheritance. Yeah.
Right. In continuation with the last question that I asked and the answer that you so beautifully offered, for a migrant, especially when forced to move either by threat or for food, the feeling of loss and resourcelessness sometimes sticks beyond the life phase of one generation. Even if it happened with someone in my generation, 2 generations after, that fear would probably linger on because these stories are so alive and so threatening. Though bred in better conditions thereafter, uh, the truth of being a no one, having nothing, lingers on, and it becomes the subconscious identity of a person, of a human being. Is that why? I mean, this is a question that I had when I was going through the book. Is that why the mother insists that she owned that? I mean, this is again a quote. She owned that story and she feels her inheritance is hurt.
Mm. Yeah, I think you really observe something really profound and beautiful about how it becomes subconscious identity and how experiences can be passed down. I remember one of the questions that I was interested in kind of dramatizing in the book, magically, but also just kind of exploring, is this idea of whether memory can be inherited in some way. And I did end up reading many studies about how what you experience can be passed on, whether that's, oftentimes intergenerational trauma. And yeah, I was really interested in how these experiences then mutate into memory and how those memories become a subconscious kind of inheritance and shape the way that these women mother, the way that they speak to their daughters, the way that they kind of orient themselves to the world. And I think, yeah, the idea of inheritance is hurt. Again, kind of thinking of that double-edged sword of, yes, this history of having been hurt, but also this history of the ability to hurt others. I think a lot of the women in the book are grappling with being the ones who are doing the hurting, who do inflict violence, and all of the weight of that as well. And definitely beyond the life phase of a generation, I was really interested in having all of these generations. I think there is kind of a stereotype in Western storytelling that a story has to progress in a very linear way, and that things can be resolved linearly through time in this very neat, kind of tied up way. And I was really interested in a more kind of circular form of time, where what the characters experience constantly circle each other and they return to very similar points. And I think wanting to narrate the mother sections when she's a young girl, as well as the daughter sections when she's a girl, I wanted this kind of cyclical feeling of the narrative. And this idea that all three women, in a lot of ways, are kind of bound together in these cyclical journeys and are always circling themselves and not necessarily branching out or gaining distance from each other, but becoming closer and closer and closer to each other's experiences. Yeah.
Amazing. Another wonderful thing that you said was, can memory be inherited? Something that has a lot to think about. My last question to you, K-Ming. The characters in the book Bestiary doesn't have names. It gives out a feeling of unbelonging, but it is never negative towards the very existence of mankind. Practically or philosophically, how do you think people reach that space where dreams and determination can be or can become the biggest power of the have-nots?
Wow, this is a really beautiful question. It reminds me of a quote or an idea that I'm not sure exactly who said it, so I think maybe I will need to do some Googling afterwards. But this idea that imagination is so incredibly powerful because the people, or imagination as a tool is so important, and it belongs, to immigrants, to those who are marginalized, to queer people, to all the people who don't necessarily have power, because the people in power are not going to be imagining your future or not going to be imagining your lives. And therefore, it's incredibly important, storytelling and imagination and this kind of generative process or regenerative process of storytelling. And I remember hearing that and being really stunned and thinking, oh, yeah, you're right. I think, and I also think that there is a kind of danger to putting weight on dreams, determination, and imagination too, because I think oftentimes people in power will be like, oh, well, you know, you can just dream big for yourself and achieve these things and have some imagination about what your life can be and pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and therefore we don't have to do anything and we don't have to change any systems or systems of power that will empower you in some way. And I think that pulling yourself up by the bootstraps narrative is incredibly dangerous and harming. And so I think that idea of imagination can be weaponized by people in power of thinking, well, oh, it's you're limiting yourself because you're unable to imagine something for yourself, and therefore, you know, you deserve, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which I think is very warped and terrible. And so I think that it's important to kind of define what those things mean for yourself. And often I think the power to imagine, the power to dream in itself can be a privilege as well. Given the space to imagine beyond your own survival can be something that not everyone, or is not something that everyone is afforded or given. So I do feel incredibly grateful to have been encouraged to kind of imagine and play in these ways through storytelling, but also that those particular storytelling tools were, to many generations, past generations of my family, were tools of survival, a way of keeping language and heritage alive at times when there was martial law, or at times when it was illegal to be speaking those languages. So I think it can be a survival tool in for language and for memory.
Right. Thank you so much, K-Ming. It was so wonderful talking to you. I have Insha back. I'll hand it over to you, Insha. But I had a wonderful learning experience actually talking to you. I got many phrases, which I will go back to my dashboard and think, and probably there would a lot more learning that will happen as I read more. Thank you so much for these words.
Yeah, thank you so much for your questions and for your insight. They were really beautiful and made me think a lot. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Insha, would you like to go ahead with your conclusion?
Thank you everyone for attending to Money Talks with K-Ming Chang. This talk series is in sync with the Invitation for Money Stories and also for the writing program, a 6 weeks workshop with Ladies Purse as the story prompt. Please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz for more. Thank you and good night.
Thank you so much, K-Ming. I hope
Thank
to
you
keep in
so
touch.
much. Yeah, no, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you.
Bye-bye.